We talked a little bit about a rectangle program where we calculate the area and the perimeter using that particular program. And I went ahead and brought up the program right here, and we can go ahead and run this thing very quickly to make sure that there aren't going to be any problems. Sure enough, it says enter the length. I will type in 2, and enter the width. I will type in 3. And it tells me that the area is 6 and the perimeter is 10. This is a pretty good system. This seems to be working out pretty good. We just put in our lines of code and it goes ahead and executes them. And in fact, this is the nature of most programs. It goes through line by line and it executes each individual line to get a result. If I go over to the Python shell, for example, I can type in 2 times 3 and I hit enter and it's going to give me a result of 6. Or 5 times 8, hit enter, and it's going to give me a result of 40. If I say x is equal to 8, and I hit enter, and then type in the letter x, it's going to come back and tell me that 8 has been stored in x. What about z? If I hit z, it comes back and says that z is not defined. You'll notice that we have good old red messages, which some people say that's blood. Okay. Z is not defined, so the solution is just to say z is equal to some value, and now type in z. Z is currently defined. The act of running this program line by line, what happened here was each line was fed to the shell and the critter was just flat out executed. So if I type in L right now, it's going to tell me that there's a 2 there. And if I type in W for the width, it's going to tell me that there is a 3 there. That is a pretty remarkable thing. Okay, so what happens though if I want to calculate, say, the great distance from one point to another? I'm going to be flying in a jet, and I want to know how much fuel it's going to take to fly from one point to the next. So I'll need things like the altitude that I'm flying at, the efficiency of fuel burn, and a few other pieces of information. Plus, I'm going to need to calculate the actual distance across the face of the globe from one point to the next. I imagine that you guys are thinking that that's a fairly complicated program, and in a sense it is, especially to a beginning programmer, and especially to an individual who doesn't have trig and perhaps calculus under their belt. But the point that I am driving to is this fairly complicated program is going to introduce a lot more lines of code. And the fact is, some programs have thousands and thousands of lines of code. So scrolling up and down through code, especially when you have all these remarks to help you keep things organized and keep your mind wrapped around what you're doing with a piece of code, it'll result in a file that is very, very hard, or a program that is very, very hard to get to the bottom of a problem. So one of the things that we decided to do, or the programmers decided to do years and years and years ago, was to organize our program into what are known as functions. For example, we have here a function that's called input. The input function will accept an argument. Please enter the length. Then what it's going to do is it's going to reach out to a little block of code that's out there that has all the lines of code necessary to interrogate the keyboard buffer, collect all the information from that keyboard buffer, know when the buffer is empty, and then get it out to a variable or out to a location. For example, I can go here to input, highlight this like so, Control C, Control V. I can hit enter the length, and I'll just type in 3, and what it's going to do is it's going to return the number 3 to the screen because I executed this inside the shell. If I'm doing it within a program though, and I don't give it a place to go, the number 3 here, actually the string representation for the number 3, doesn't go anywhere. It is lost. I have to store it somewhere, so I have to use what is known as an operator, and that's this equals sign, which is an assignment operator. Okay? So I have input, which is a function that's called, that has an argument that is fed into the function. It prompts me with a message that says enter this length. I type in the information that I need, I hit the enter key, that function has lines of code necessary to recognize that enter key and then return back the string character 3 and stuff it into my variable. So if I come over here like so, and I copy this, and I paste it, and I hit enter, and let's say that I put in the number 7, I can type in L underscore str, hit enter, and sure enough, the string value or the string character for the number 7 is currently stored in the variable L underscore str. And I named that variable to help me to remember that this piece of information or this piece of stuff that's inside this variable is actually a string, and I can't do any mathematical operations on it. So there's a function. Here's another function called int, and what it does is it takes whatever my string value is and it just does all the lines of code necessary to make it possible to turn my string character 7 into an actual number. Okay, so functions reduce the number of lines of code or make it convenient for us to be able to execute a program by packaging a body of code into a name that makes sense to us. So what I want to be able to do, though, is I want to set myself up so that I won't find myself in a place where I have so many lines of code that it becomes so unwieldy that I will not be able to figure out what's going on in my program. And the way that we do that for beginners, the way that we start doing that is by taking every program that we make and putting it in its own function. And since this is my main program, how about I just call this main? So how does Python know that I'm dealing with a function? Well, I use a keyword called def, which means define function, and then I'll type in main, M-E-I-N, and I use an open parenthesis and a close parenthesis, and this clues Python into the fact that, wow, we are defining a function. But how does Python know what is the first line of code and what is the last line of code in a function? How does it know the beginning and the end of our function? Well, other programs might use an open curly brace, like so, lots of lines of code, and then a closing curly brace. That's how other programs might do that. But Python doesn't work it out quite that way. What Python does is it's looking for an indentation. So if I grab all my lines of code like this and I tap or I indent whatever number of spaces, as long as they're all the same, if I indent those lines of code, Python now is going to go ahead and treat all of this code as part of a function whose name is main. How do we execute that function? Well, I don't know if we need to. Let's see if we can make this thing fly. Okay, what I'm going to do is save this. Let's come up to run, and I'm going to run the module, and it comes back and it says restart, which is what it's supposed to do, and it executed my little Python program, and as you see, nothing came out. Well, let's see if it created any variables. For example, I'll type in L, see what that does. Nope, there's no L, there's no nothing. Interesting. It appears that our program no longer works. Well, as you may or may not have realized, when we want to execute a function, we go ahead and type in the function name and an open parenthesis and a close parenthesis. We have to have that at the minimum because it turns out that we have a function name where all of the lines of code are actually stored into this variable, and we have what's called an operator, which is formed by the open parenthesis and the closing parenthesis. If it sees these guys together, so in any case, such as this case here, or this case where there's nothing between the two, it will treat this as though it's an executable body of code. Okay? So I have this little executable body of code, and if I want to execute it, actually execute it, I will go main. I'll go open parenthesis, close parenthesis, because that's the operator. Just like up here, I have A is equal to L times W, right? The time symbol is known as a binary operator because it's going to work on two variables. This binary operator multiplies whatever's in L, whatever's in W, and then it goes to what's known as the assignment operator, which stuffs the result into a variable called A. Hoping that that makes sense, all right? But what I did down here is I put in the function name, and then I said, all right, function, here's the operator to cause the function to execute. You should now execute this thing, okay? So let's see what happens. I'll go ahead and save it. I'll come up here and do the run. And now it's saying enter the length. This is excellent. So I'll take 2, and the width will go 3. Hit enter, the area is 6, the parameter is 10. So it actually executed my program. So now let's see if I hit L, just like so. Hit enter, it can't find L. What if I put in W? It can't find W either. Neither of these critters are defined. Now that's really, really interesting. This is known, or this is caused by what is known as variable scope. You know what a telescope is. You know what a microscope is. It helps you to be able to see, okay? So in a sense, what we have here is any variables that are inside a particular function can be seen by the function, but anything outside of the function no longer sees it, because literally what's happening here is Python sees this piece of code right here and says, oh, I've got to execute main. So it goes over to main and it says, let's see, main is all of this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing all of this, everything that's here. You will reserve memory for L string, for L, for W string, for W, for A, for P. It's going to reserve all its own blocks of memory, pieces of memory to hold all of this information. It's going to go ahead and execute everything the way that we want, and the moment it doesn't see any more indentation, what it's going to do is it says, you know what, I am done with all these variables. I don't need these variables anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to release the memory that's holding those variables so that another program or function can use that memory. This is known as variable scope, because these variables only exist as long as the function is running. The moment the function stops running, the variables go away. We can't see them anymore. So the act of using or creating a function called main and then using that function is also very beneficial because it saves memory in the long term. Okay, it keeps us better organized with respect to our resources, and it makes it possible to be able to use our or free up our resources for other features in our program or other functions that are in our program. So what are we going to do from here on out? We're going to go ahead and define a main, and in that main we are going to execute the main thread of our program. If we find that our program is becoming unwieldy and long, what we might do is we might take a body of our code and actually stick it in its own function. But that's getting a little ahead of things. We'll go ahead and let you just simply get the main thing figured out, make it work for you, and hopefully your head will get wrapped around it as time presses on, and then we will move on to using other functions. With that, I'll say happy coding.